The boardroom smelled like old wood and expensive coffee. 12 people sat around a long table, every one of them watching me. I had been building toward this moment for 6 months. My name was on every slide. The strategy was mine. The client relationship was mine too. I was mid-sentence when the CEO raised his hand. I stopped talking. He took a slow sip from his mug, set it down, and leaned back like a man with all the time in the world. "That's enough," he said. The room went quiet. The knowing kind. "You're sharp, but this deal is generational. $100 million. Multi-year." He paused. "You're too young to lead at this level." Then he smiled just slightly. "This isn't a startup pitch competition." Someone laughed. Small and quick. I heard it. He turned to the man 3 seats down. "Richard, 52 years old. Silver hair. 3 months on the job. Richard will take point." My slides stayed on the screen. My name disappeared from the agenda. I nodded. I sat down. I did not argue. And here's the question you are probably asking. The same one I could see forming on faces around that table. Why was I so calm? The meeting ended. Richard accepted handshakes with the practiced comfort of someone long accustomed to being congratulated. I walked back to my desk. By the time I sat down, the calendar invite had already been updated. Where my name had been listed as Client Executive Lead, it now read one word. Richard. My new role. Support. 20 minutes later, an email went to the board. The CEO used phrases like seasoned leadership and executive-level gravitas. A deal of this magnitude, he explained, required decades of experience at the front of the room. Then he sent me a private message. "Your time will come. Watch and learn." I stared at those 5 words. Read them forward. Read them backward. Thought about what they meant, what they assumed, and what they completely missed. Then I opened my email and scrolled back 6 months. There was a long chain of correspondence between me and the client's CFO, Marcus. Strategy sessions, integration discussions, late-night troubleshooting threads. A relationship built one conversation at a time. I forwarded the entire thread to myself. Because here is what the CEO had not considered. The client did not see me as support. Let me tell you who I actually was, because context matters here. I was 29 years old. I had joined the company 2 years earlier as a senior analyst and moved fast, not because I chased titles, but because the work required it. I had built the analytics framework that first caught this client's attention. Not a borrowed template, something built from scratch to solve the exact data problems they were struggling with. When they agreed to a pilot, I led it. 3 months of late calls, technical revisions, and constant communication. One Sunday at 2 in the morning, their integration broke down hours before a major internal review. I answered the phone. I stayed on until it was fixed. After that night, the client's CFO, a direct man named Marcus, started reaching out to me personally. My number was saved in his phone. The CEO knew this. He had seen the emails. But in his mind, access did not equal authority. Results did not equal leadership. Leadership, to him, looked a specific way, and that look required a certain age. He believed leadership was about tenure. I believed leadership was about results. That difference was going to matter soon. But this was not the first time he had treated me like I did not belong at the table. 3 months before the boardroom, I had walked into a strategy session with a full proposal. The company had focused on mid-market clients for years, but I had done the research. Enterprise healthcare was wide open, strong numbers, right timing. I had built a complete framework, market entry, risk analysis, resource requirements, 3-year projections. I started presenting. The CEO cut me off 4 minutes in. "Let's let the adults debate risk," he said. A few people shifted in their seats. Nobody said anything. 2 months later, He presented almost the exact same framework to investors. Same structure, same arguments, same numbers. My name was not mentioned once. I sat in that investor meeting and watched it happen in real time. That was the moment everything changed, not in an angry way, but in a very clear and deliberate way. I understood that talent alone would not protect me here. Documentation would. I started saving everything. Draft emails with timestamps, archived Slack threads, strategy documents with version history. I kept records the way a careful person keeps receipts, not expecting trouble, just understanding that memory fades and paper does not. I also started recording rehearsals, every prep session, every dry run, every closed-door meeting where the presentation was being shaped, including one session the CEO had completely forgotten was recorded. It was a small prep meeting, just the CEO, 2 other senior leaders, and me. We were reviewing the final deck, the deck I had built, the strategy one had designed, the story I had written from beginning to end. The CEO was relaxed that day, more open than usual. He leaned back and gestured toward the screen. "The kid built a solid deck," he said. "We'll polish it up." The kid. He moved on immediately, talking about talking points and how Richard should open the meeting. But I had stopped listening after those 6 words. The kid built a solid deck. I quietly saved the recording to a secure folder. No announcement. No mention to anyone. Not for revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was not collecting ammunition. I was collecting clarity. The difference matters. Revenge is emotional. Clarity is strategic. I needed a real record of what was being said when people believed it did not count. I closed my laptop and walked back to my desk. Meanwhile, I was watching the client's behavior closely. Their response times were shortening. Their questions were sharper. Something was shifting on their end, and it was not moving in a positive direction. The deal was still alive, but it was not healthy. The first external negotiation call was on a Tuesday afternoon. Richard led it. I had prepared a full briefing document for him myself, because despite everything, I still wanted the deal to close. The company's success was my success regardless of who stood at the front. But a briefing document can only carry someone so far. 15 minutes in, Richard overstated our implementation timeline by nearly 2 months. I saw Marcus go very still. Then the technical questions began. Marcus asked about specific integration checkpoints, the kind only someone who had lived inside the project architecture could answer accurately. Richard hesitated. A pause settled over the call, long enough to become uncomfortable. "Can we hear from?" Marcus started. My name was at the end of that sentence. I could hear it coming. Richard jumped in before Marcus could finish. He answered the question himself. Incorrectly. The call ended with polite language and no confirmed next steps. 20 minutes later, an email arrived from Marcus. 2 sentences. "I'd like to reconnect this week if possible." Separately, I read that one word twice. Not a group call. Not an official session. They wanted to speak with me alone. Outside the assigned roles. Outside the official version of this deal the CEO had constructed. They wanted the truth. I waited a few hours, then replied calmly. We found an evening slot. After business hours, no overlap with the official schedule. No risk of it appearing on a shared calendar. I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and no agenda other than to listen. Marcus got to the point quickly. He valued directness. "Your leadership on the call seemed disconnected from the actual project," he said. "The answers didn't match what we've been building together." I did not defend Richard. I did not attack him either. I acknowledged the concern and shifted to substance. I walked Marcus through the real execution roadmap, accurate timelines, honest risk assessments, the specific integration milestones his team actually cared about. No inflation, just the plan, clearly explained. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "This makes more sense," he said. We talked another 20 minutes. I answered 3 follow-up questions. The tension from the earlier meeting slowly dissolved. Then just before we ended, he asked something unexpected. "Will you stay involved going forward?" I told him I would do everything I could. What I did not say was how carefully I would have to manage that promise, or how much was quietly building on my end that he did not yet know about. Back inside the company, the numbers were quietly telling a story nobody at the top wanted to hear. I still had access to the internal deal tracking dashboard, a privilege from my earlier role that had never been removed. I checked it every morning. What I had been watching over the 2 weeks since the first call looked less like momentum and more like a slow, steady withdrawal. Procurement on the client's side had gone quiet. Their legal team, moving quickly during the pilot phase, had slowed considerably. The timeline the CEO had been projecting to the board was now at least 3 weeks behind. I knew what this was. I had seen it before with large enterprise clients. Not red tape or process friction. It was confidence erosion, that specific hesitation that sets in when a client starts questioning whether the people about to receive $100 million truly understand what they agreed to. The CEO called it enterprise red tape in an internal update. He made it sound normal and temporary. I said nothing in that meeting. Then the board requested a formal progress update. I paid very close attention to what the CEO was going to say when he stood up and described the deal's current state to the people who ultimately owned this company. The board update was held in the smaller top-floor conference room. 8 people, 5 board members, the CEO, our CFO Arthur, and me, brought in for technical context. The CEO presented with complete confidence. "Strong momentum," he said. "The client is engaged. We are on track. Green indicators across every milestone. Solid relationship." A client call he referenced that, according to the dashboard, had lasted less than 8 minutes. Most board members had no reason to question what they were hearing. But one, Patricia, 7 years on the board with an enterprise operations background, glanced at me twice during the presentation. Quick, observational. After the meeting, my phone buzzed. A message from Patricia. "Is it really on track?" I thought carefully before replying. I was not trying to stir anything. I was answering a direct question from someone who deserved a direct answer. "There are execution risks not visible in that update," I wrote. She responded within seconds. "I'd like to understand more. Can we talk?" I said yes. That single exchange was the first real crack in the official version of events. Small cracks have a way of widening on their own when the pressure behind them is real enough, and the pressure here had been building for weeks. I spent the next 4 days building something nobody had asked me to build. It started as a way to organize my own thinking, a cleaner proposal, restructured around the specific concerns Marcus had raised in our private call. But once I began, I could not stop. Every gap I had seen in Richard's presentations, every unanswered question, every assumption the current proposal made that the actual project data did not support, I worked through all of it carefully. I adjusted the pricing to reflect realistic implementation cost. I rewrote the integration timeline with honest milestones and buffer weeks included. I added a risk section, not to alarm anyone, but to show we had mapped the problems and built responses for each. By the 4th day, I had a complete revised proposal, better structured than the original, more honest, more likely to actually work. I saved it privately, told no one, mentioned it nowhere. I had learned something important over the past several months. Timing matters as much as content. The right answer placed on the table too early gets ignored or taken. I needed the moment to arrive on its own. On a Thursday morning, it did. A formal letter came from the client, addressed to the CEO and the board. They were losing faith. The letter made that plain. The letter used careful corporate language, but the meaning was sharp. Pending further clarity on execution timelines and technical responsibilities, we are reviewing our options, including alternative vendors. Alternative vendors. 3 months before a signed contract, after a 6-month pilot, after everything we had built. An emergency meeting was called within the hour. I walked in and found the CEO at the head of the table, looking like a man who had stepped out of sunlight into sudden cold. Richard sat beside him. For the first time since the reassignment, Richard looked genuinely overwhelmed. No performed confidence. Just a man sitting with his hands flat on the table, facing a problem beyond his preparation. Other executives filled in around them. I took a seat near the end. Nobody spoke. The letter sat in the middle of the table, like something no one wanted to pick up. The CEO straightened. He looked around the room the way a person does when deciding what kind of authority to project. Then he asked the question that had been coming for weeks. What went wrong? The room stayed quiet. People looked at their hands, at the letter, at neutral points on the wall. I looked at the CEO. I had the answer. I had carried it quietly for weeks. I had been patient long enough. I did not raise my voice. I did not lead with emotion. I simply began talking in the calm, even tone I would use to walk a new team member through a technical process. I covered the timeline, the first negotiation call, and the overstated implementation speed. The technical questions answered incorrectly. The gap between what the dashboard showed and what the board had been told. The slowing procurement activity visible in the tracking system for 2 weeks before this letter arrived. I did not name Richard. I did not assign blame. I presented what had happened the way you present data, just the sequence of events and what they produced. The CEO's jaw tightened midway through. We don't need pessimism. We need solutions. Before I could respond, Arthur, our CFO, quiet and precise, someone who rarely interrupted, looked up from his notepad. Let them finish, Arthur said. Just 3 words. The CEO leaned back. He said nothing. I finished the summary. Expressions around the table shifted as the full picture came into focus. The recognition that settles in when something long suspected is finally spoken plainly. Then I paused. I told them the part they did not yet know, the detail that was going to reframe everything they had just heard. I've had 3 independent calls with the client's CFO. The silence that followed had a different weight than all the others. The CEO looked at me directly. His expression held for a long moment. Why? He said. Because they asked. I said. That was the complete and honest answer. I had not arranged a back channel. Marcus had reached out to me directly after the first failed negotiation call, and I had responded because that was what the situation required. What did you discuss? The CEO asked. Their real concerns. About the timeline. About who understood the integration architecture. About whether the execution plan reflected what we actually built during the pilot. I reached into the folder I had brought. 2 printed copies. I slid the revised proposal across the table. Based on that feedback, I built this. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Arthur picked it up. He flipped through the first few pages slowly, reading carefully. The CEO watched Arthur. Something behind his controlled expression had shifted. Richard had not moved at all. A voice came through the phone line. A board member attending remotely. Can everyone see that document? We'd like to review it. The room, which had been moving firmly in one direction all meeting, quietly turned. The board review of my proposal took place the next morning. I was not in the room for the first hour. I had been asked to be available, so I sat at my desk and worked and waited. I had done what I could. Whatever happened next was going to happen. At 9:47, a message came asking me to come up. When I walked in, the atmosphere had changed. Patricia had a printed copy with handwritten notes in the margins. Another board member was cross-referencing something on his laptop. People were leaning forward. My proposal had done one thing well. It addressed every concern from the client's letter, point by point, not reactively, but in a way that showed those concerns had been understood weeks before the letter arrived. The CEO sat at the head of the table. He had the look of a man deciding which version of the next 5 minutes served him best. "Why wasn't this our official position going into negotiations?" he asked. His voice was almost neutral, but the question carried its own answer inside it, and everyone in the room could hear that. Nobody responded. Arthur said, "The question now is what we do with it." Then Patricia looked directly at me. "Should we bring them back into the negotiation process?" The room followed her gaze. The CEO agreed. Not warmly or immediately, but he agreed. "You can assist," he told me that afternoon, in a brief private exchange after the board meeting. His tone made it clear he still considered this his deal. I was being permitted back into a room I had never, in his view, fully earned. I said thank you and walked out. The next client call was 2 days later. Richard opened it. I had worked directly with him on the talking points because I genuinely wanted the conversation to succeed. About 10 minutes in, Marcus asked a question about the revised integration model. He did not ask Richard. He said my name. "Could you walk us through that section?" I answered. I covered the model in clear detail. Marcus followed with 2 more questions, both directed at me. By midpoint, a quiet reality had settled over everyone on the line. Richard was still listed as lead, but the actual conversation had migrated completely. Richard stayed professional. He did not resist. He contributed where he could, and let the call find its natural shape. After we disconnected, Marcus sent a short message. He copied me, not Richard, not the CEO. "We'd like a final in-person meeting. Executive level. We'll send dates." The official version and the actual version of this deal were now 2 entirely separate things. The in-person meeting was on a Wednesday morning at the client's headquarters. We rode the elevator up, the CEO, Richard, 2 senior team members, and me, and nobody said much. Everyone was carrying something: preparation, tension, different versions of what they hoped was about to happen. The conference room was large and well lit. Their side of the table held 6 people: Marcus, their COO Diane, and others I recognized from the pilot phase. Firm handshakes, measured smiles. The CEO opened the meeting. He was skilled at this part: the room entrance, the opener, the confident first 5 minutes. He moved through the initial section smoothly. Then, about halfway through, Diane raised her hand. "We'd like to hear from the architect of this plan," she said. The room went still. Every person on our side looked at the CEO. He looked at the screen, at Diane, then at me. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he nodded. One small, quiet movement. I stood up. $100 million was somewhere in the air between us. Everything I had built, documented, protected, and quietly carried for months had arrived at this single point. Every late night, every saved file, every careful conversation had led here. I took one breath, and I began. I did not try to impress anyone. That might sound like a strange strategy for the most important presentation of my career, but it was the right one. I had seen what happens when people try to impress in rooms like this. Overselling, inflated projections, confident language built on shaky ground. That was exactly how we had gotten here. So I started with the truth. I told them clearly where the original timeline had been optimistic and where my revised version differed. I explained each adjustment, not to criticize the past, but to show we had examined real data and built something honest around it. I walked through the integration architecture in detail, explained the 3 primary risk scenarios and our response to each, described the team structure, escalation protocols, and the checkpoints where they could evaluate progress, and hold us fully accountable. Marcus asked 2 questions. I answered both directly. Diane asked one technical question requiring specific pilot data. I had it memorized. I answered without hesitating. When I finished, the room felt different. Something held tightly had been allowed to loosen. I could see it in how people sat, in the way tension had quietly left the table. Marcus looked at Diane. A brief, private exchange. Then Diane looked toward the CEO. Could we have a moment? She meant without the rest of our team. They asked the CEO and the others to wait in the lobby. I stayed. The door closed. Just me, Marcus, Diane, and 2 other members of their executive team. The formal energy of the meeting dissolved quickly. People sat back. Someone poured water. Diane folded her hands on the table and looked at me with the directness I had come to respect even before I met her. We want you as executive sponsor for this contract, she said. Not the CEO. Not Richard. Me. I kept my expression steady, but something moved through me. Not triumph. More like the feeling of a long-held breath finally released. We'd like it written into the agreement, Marcus added. Named sponsor. Executive accountability sits with you. I asked 2 questions about scope and reporting structure. They answered both clearly. We talked 15 minutes, practically and without drama. Then Diane said something I had not expected. We almost walked away, she said. Not because the product was wrong, because we weren't sure anyone on your side actually understood what they were agreeing to. She looked at me steadily. You understood. I thanked her. I meant it completely. Then I walked out to the lobby where the CEO was sitting, straightened my jacket, and sat down beside him. What did they say? He asked. I told him everything. He argued, of course. That was predictable. On the car ride back, he said it was about optics. A 29-year-old as executive sponsor on a deal this size would raise questions. The board would want explanations. Clients sometimes stated things in the moment and later reconsidered. I listened to everything. None of it was entirely wrong. Optics were real. Board reactions were real. Client positions did sometimes shift. But this one was not shifting. Marcus had been explicit. Diane had been explicit. The condition had been stated plainly, and they were the ones holding the pen. Without agreement on this point, the deal would not close. No contract. No revenue. No relationship. The CEO brought it to the board the next day. He framed it carefully, but the reality was unavoidable. The client had made a specific, named request. Patricia asked what our options were if we declined. The answer was simple. Push back. Lose the deal entirely. Arthur said it the way he always said things, quietly, without drama, in a way that closed the conversation completely. This is a revenue decision, he said, not an optics decision. The CEO sat with that. Then he nodded. He did not look at me when he did it. He looked at the table. But it did not matter where he looked. The answer was yes. The contract was signed on a Friday morning. $100 million. Multi-year. An expansion clause that created a path toward additional phases. Phases that, if exercised, could grow the total value considerably. I sat in the signing room and watched Marcus and Diane sign on behalf of their company. I signed on behalf of ours. The CEO shook hands with everyone, thanked the client team warmly, and did it professionally. The internal announcement went out that afternoon. The CEO wrote it himself. He congratulated the team, spoke of collective effort and shared vision. Well-written and generous in the way that carefully prepared announcements are generous. It included everyone and specifically named no one. I read it and moved on. Then Marcus posted on LinkedIn a few paragraphs about the signing. Near the end, he named me directly, used the phrase visionary leadership, described what the collaboration had looked like from his side. The post went live at 4 in the afternoon. By 6, it had been shared inside the company 16 times. My phone filled with messages from colleagues who had never reached out before. By morning, every board member had seen it. Patricia messaged Arthur. Arthur forwarded it to HR. The conversation I had not started, but had always known was coming, had finally begun. The HR review was initiated by the board. That detail matters. 2 weeks after the signing, a formal internal review opened into management conduct patterns within the enterprise division. I cooperated fully and provided what I had been collecting: timestamped drafts, archived message threads, records of the healthcare framework proposal, and what had happened to it afterward. Then there was the recording, the prep session, the CEO's relaxed voice in a small room. 6 words. The kid built a solid deck. HR reviewed it. The board reviewed it. A legal consultant reviewed it. What emerged was not a dramatic revelation. It was the quieter, more uncomfortable kind. A pattern. Age-based dismissal. Credit attribution failures. A management style that treated youth as disqualification and considered that belief obvious rather than biased. The healthcare framework provided the clearest example. My ideas were documented. My timeline was documented. The investor presentation that followed was documented. This was not a single bad moment or a comment made under pressure. This was how the enterprise division had been operating. Consistently, across time, across multiple situations and multiple people. The board now had the complete picture, not the version from monthly updates, but the version that emerged when documents were laid side by side and the timeline was allowed to speak plainly. That picture required a response. The announcement was framed carefully. These things always are. Strategic restructuring of the enterprise division. Clean, neutral language. The kind that communicates significant change without assigning blame in writing. The CEO kept his title. That was real. But the restructuring was real too. The enterprise division, previously reporting through him, now reported directly to the board. New accountability lines. New oversight. Different in ways nobody could miss if they were paying attention. The memo also announced new leadership of the enterprise division. My name, framed as succession planning. An acknowledgement of demonstrated capability and a long-term organizational investment. Privately, everyone in that building understood what it actually was. A correction. I did not feel triumphant. That surprised me. I had imagined if this kind of moment came, it would feel like winning. It did not. It felt more like stepping back from a long repair job when the thing finally works the way it was always supposed to. I spent that evening responding to messages. A few were kind. A few were simply curious. One was from a 26-year-old analyst on my team. 4 words. "Thank you," she wrote. I read it twice. The next morning, the CEO's assistant sent a meeting request. One-on-one. His office. No agenda listed. He closed the door behind him. He usually preferred doors open, the way powerful people do, to signal nothing to hide. Closing it meant something. We sat down. He looked at me without speaking, and I let the silence stay. I had learned, over the past several months, that silence does not need to be filled. Then he said it. I was protecting the company. I thought about that carefully, because I try to give people's explanations the fairness they deserve. You were protecting your image, I said. The company didn't need protection from me. He looked toward the window. A long pause. You built something good, he said finally. I should have said so. You said it once, I told him. In the prep room. You just forgot I was listening. He did not respond to that. Then something I had not fully anticipated. You proved me wrong, he said. I sat with those words. I had thought about this conversation many times in the months leading to it. What I would say, what I would feel, whether it would bring satisfaction or relief or something I could not name. What I actually felt was simple. Not warm, not cold, just clear. I didn't prove you wrong, I said. I proved myself right. Those are different things. He nodded once. We shook hands when I stood to leave. 6 months passed. The kind of 6 months where you stop measuring everything against what came before and simply work, building things, solving problems, making decisions that matter. Enterprise revenue doubled, not through anything clever or dramatic, but because we finally had a structure that matched the quality of work being done inside it. Honest timelines, clear accountability, a team that trusted the person leading them had read every page of the actual project. 2 new major clients signed. Both came through direct trust built conversation by conversation, the same way Marcus had come. Not through sales pressure, but through being the kind of person who stays on the phone at 2 in the morning when something breaks. Team morale shifted. People stayed longer on hard problems. They pushed back more in meetings, which is always the sign of a team safe enough to think out loud. I started mentoring 4 younger managers. We met every 2 weeks. I did not focus on surviving difficult environments, though we discussed it. Mostly I helped them think clearly about the work, what it required, what it measured, what it was for. Nobody on my team got called too young. Not once. That was not an accident. It was a standard I set on my first day, and I held it without exception. The year was ending far better than it had started. The last board meeting of the year was held in the same room where, 12 months earlier, I had been told to sit down. Same long table, same coffee smell, different energy entirely. Year-end results were reviewed. Enterprise numbers, new client portfolio, projections ahead. I presented for about 20 minutes. The board asked questions. I answered them. It was the kind of meeting that feels almost ordinary until you step back and recognize how much had to happen for it to reach that point. Near the end, a new strategic opportunity came up, a potential expansion into a market the company had never entered. Compelling numbers, right timing, real risk, but the manageable kind, clear edges and a visible map. The room began discussing it. At a certain point, the CEO turned toward me. Not dramatically, just the natural turn of someone who wants to know what another person thinks. "What's your recommendation?" he asked. I looked around the table. Patricia, Arthur, the team leads I had brought into the division over the past 6 months. I thought about the question. Took one breath. "I'll lead it," I said. Nobody laughed. Nobody checked anyone else's expression or glanced at my age. There was just the room, and the work, and the next thing to build. This time, nobody questioned it at all.